This time on Poll Hub, we're taking a trip way back to the election of 2020. There was a lot made of how the polls did last year, lots of coverage that produced a lot of heat, but maybe not so much light. Now, the main organization of public opinion science has completed a study and reached a surprising, at least to some, conclusion. We're going to find out what that is. We'll speak with one of the authors. Then we go even further back in time to find out what women of one era thought the next generation of women would face. Some of those answers sound pretty crazy in 2021, so we'll look at those. There's a lot to do, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho.
And I'm Lee Miringoff.
And we have talked a lot internally, and we've talked a lot on this podcast about 2020, the election, and the polls. We are polls, so we've talked a lot about the polls and how the polls did. This sounds a lot like deja vu all over again, to quote one of your favorite Yankees, Lee, in 2016. But 2020, once again, the polling industry faced a lot of challenges. Some polls were dead on. Our Arizona poll, dead on. It was a tie. Biden won by 10, 12,000 votes. But we and other polls missed in some other states, and some national polls missed. And so the organization that we all belong to, a part of, called the American Association for Public Opinion Research, we call them APOR, put together a panel, a group of people to find out what happened in 2020. And we are lucky enough to have the chairman of that panel with us, Dr. Joshua Clinton. He's a professor of political science at Vanderbilt. My friends call it Vandy because I went there down in Nashville. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Before we do anything, can you tell us what you were expected to do as a panel, what you set out to do, and how you kind of came about going to that task after the polls closed on election night of 2020?
Yeah, certainly. So in the fall of 2019, the APOR, the Association of American Political Opinion Researchers, kind of put together a task force that was going to be tasked with basically collecting all the publicly available polling data on 2020, including the primaries, and then documenting how well the polls did. And then if issues arose, trying to do our level best to diagnose kind of what went wrong to help the polling profession go forward, to give it basically an unbiased, overview of what was going on. And so they put together a task force of which, I was the chair, that had many other individuals that are superly capable, including both from the industry, from academia, from nonprofits, basically a wide range of experience and expertise that all work together collaboratively and cooperatively to try to give our level best about what went down. And so throughout the entire 2020 election cycle, we were tasked with collecting all of that data. And so we have all of that data and then analyzing it to figure out how well the polls did compared to the certified vote. And so we had to wait till all the vote was certified in January before we could really begin our task. And then even then, to try to figure out how well the polls did, where there were misses, where there was, where they did okay. And to the extent there were systematic differences, kind of what might help explain some of the errors, the polling error that we found in 2020. So it was a pretty lengthy task, especially with the pandemic and everyone kind of being busy. We had way too many Zoom meetings to kind of discuss that, because it's very important as the public-facing part of APOR that everything we did was by unanimity. Moreover, it was kind of industry-wide, so we weren't trying to rate pollsters or go into the details of particular pollsters or polls, but kind of give a broad overview to help allow the profession going forward to kind of figure out, this is what on balance what happened, and so to allow pollsters to kind of experiment and kind of take that information going forward to help innovate.
Yeah, so Josh, so you had signed on for this before the election day and probably saw this as a great compliment to have been asked to, based on your expertise, to take on this task. And then election night, did you have an oh my God moment? What have I done?
I had several of those, because it was no longer election night, it was election week. And so when they first asked me, I was like, are you sure you want me? And then election night, I'm like, I'm sure I don't want me anymore. So that whole process, when election night comes, the results were coming out, I was like, oh my goodness, what have I got myself signed up for? But that said, everyone in the task force was super professional, and it was obviously a really important job and task. And so it was actually a real pleasure to be able to kind of spend a lot of time kind of digging in and try to figure out what we could actually say. So yeah, it did consume more of my life than I had hoped or wanted to, but hopefully there was some resolution, even though the ultimate conclusions of the report, are still a little bit ambiguous in terms of what we can actually say about things. But those are some of the limitations that we just live with in terms of what the data is that we have available to us.
Yeah, the headlines were pretty rough. I think the Washington Post said something like 2020 presidential polls suffered worst performance in decades. Wall Street Journal, worst polling miss in 40 years. Is that what the conclusion of the report was?
Well, technically, right. I mean, that is accurate, right? And so if you look at the amount of error, and by error, we meant basically to the extent if you look at the margin between what the polls predicted Biden Trump would be versus what the certified vote were, I mean, the errors were technically bigger than they've ever been. So at the state level polls, like the average error was 4.3 points overstatement of Biden. And so, yeah, that's the largest it's been basically since 1980. But the other hand, like,
were you surprised that was the takeaway?
No, because that's the kind of that's the most provocative take, right? And so that's the headline capture. That's what people talk about. But you put that in broader context, and that's not to say that number is good, but like in some ways, it's kind of, you think about the difficulty of the task that pollsters have trying to figure out pre-election polling, especially in 2020, right? We had a pandemic. We had new voting systems being done in a lot of the critical states. We knew a lot of elections were going to be super close. And so, there's a amount of uncertainty, even in a normal election, trying to figure out, well, who's going to vote on an election on election day, or in this time in the pre-election, in the early voting. And then do you have the right kind of electorate? What's turnout going to be? How are they going to break? I mean, that's a really, really complicated task. And I think sometimes people equate, you've got a number with being precision, but on the other hand, like 4.3 points of error, like it's not super great, but it's also kind of remarkable if you think about the level of difficulty involved. And then the other thing you think about is like, a lot of things, what we take about from polls is like, do you really care? I mean, you do, right? Particularly if you're trying to allocate political resources, but like if you're 1 or 2 or 3 points off versus kind of, usually we use pre-election polls. I use pre-election polls to give me a sense like, what's going on in the country? Like, where's it going to be close? Where's there going to be blowouts? And by that perspective, like, 76% of the state level presidential polls got the right answer correct. And that's including, those kind of cases like Arizona, where it's essentially a tied race. Like either way you go, like it's so close, it doesn't really matter. And if you look at those polls where the margin was actually greater than what their statistical level of precision measured using the margin of error. So like if you just double the margin of error, which is a generous interpretation, but they're like 98% of those polls that had a margin greater than kind of the twice the margin of error correctly identified by the winner. And so I think like in some sense we got, 2008 and 2012 gave us the idea that I think we're more precise, right? Because the poll, nailed it exactly. And so now, not to say there's not issues in polling, right? And we identify some of them. They're kind of concerning going forward. But I think in general, like getting a better sense among the public and the consumers about, there's a lot of decisions that go into making a poll. And, despite all of those, like it's not super great, but it's also, it's hard. It's really, really hard to do so.
So what would you have liked the main takeaway to be? What do you think was the most important thing that the committee actually found?
I mean, I think the most important thing that I thought that we found was that, it's something that we couldn't prove, but it's something that's been lurking and kind of concerning pollsters for a long, long time. It's that, we're in a world in which the response rates, as you guys know, it's like, it's going down and down and down. And for a long time, it's been okay. And we've had to do like statistical adjustments to try to make sure that those adjustments are kind of representative of voters. But, in 2020, that those adjustments didn't seem sufficient for the task, right? Even people are waiting on partisanship or kind of 2016 vote, right? They didn't get it right. And so the concerning, thing is that maybe the polling problems are not so much technological as psychological in terms of the people that are answering polls. In particular, it seems like the skews that we've seen last 2 election cycles may be more unbalanced partisanship. So maybe there's certain sets of Republican voters or people who vote for Republicans who are willing to vote on election day, but not participate in polls because they don't trust the media, they don't trust pollsters, they don't trust institutions. And that's not necessarily a happy tune. I mean, it's not a happy tune, but I think to us as the task force, like that seemed to be the looming issue that, we couldn't, to be clear, we can't prove that, right? And that's one of the frustrations we had, because we don't have that data on who didn't respond. But it seems to be like, if you looked around, like the number of new voters seem to be a little bit understated for support for Republicans. And just in general, so if you reweighted the data to try to match 2016 votes, you were still like, you can't make it work to also match 2020. And so there doesn't seem to be.
You sure know that feeling.
Yeah. So it's kind of, there's an issue there in terms of the people that are willing to take polls, at least in 2020, that was kind of, that's a nuanced, right? So we can have that conversation on the podcast, because, and your audience understands that more, but that's a level of nuance that's hard to communicate.
It's not a headline.
No, it's not a headline, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think a couple of the points that you're making are really very important. And the first being that this conflation of, precision and quantification, which you alluded to, the notion that, we're putting out numbers, and, we always talk about science being a little messy, but it's the best thing we got. And so, when you see those numbers, it's off to the races. I think also, you're trying to talk about what the context is that we all function within when we're doing polls. I wanted to mention that I was on the committee in 2016, and that was the group that came up with the magic bullet, which was weighting by education. I didn't necessarily share in that, and took a little heat for trying to come up with some alternative views of that. I think what we saw in 2020 was that fix didn't work. And I think your report alluded to that very strongly. But I think you also, and this is wonderful, you put to bed certain concerns people have had over the Donald Trump period. And I wonder if you could just talk about a few of those things, or you can comment on anything I was saying there.
Yeah.
My little rant.
So like a lot of people, it's a complicated thing. So we're kind of looking at to see, some of the things that people were talking about in terms of like whether it was late voters or whether it was people who were, lying to poll, responding, but then like these, and that's a very nuanced term, right? When people say like shy Trump voters, right? You ask 5 different people, they have 5 different definitions of what that means. And so that's a very kind of loaded, if not ambiguous term. And so, but it didn't seem to be the case that people were lying, right? So the errors that we found were not endemic to asking about President Trump in particular, right? Because we found similar level, if not larger errors when we asked about Republican senatorial and gubernatorial contests. Now,
important contribution.
So, but that doesn't, but one thing that we couldn't know is like, and this was kind of where it's a little unsettling for us that, we wish we could nail this down, but like, there was a level of political dialogue, as around 2020 about voter suppression polls, about fake news, right? That kind of seeded around the kind of the politics. And it's plausible that, those types of language basically affected how people chose to participate in polls. Like maybe participating in polling now becomes not an act of civic duty, but it becomes a partisan political act because of language that people are using, which then raises the question about, and this is the difficulty thing about, we didn't really, people say, why didn't you suggest what we should do? And so we didn't really, that first of all, that we didn't think that was our goal, but also like, it's not really clear to us really kind of, we're going to leave that up to the pollsters to figure out because, so for example, it's possible that the errors that we saw could have been unique to presidential election and the candidacy of President Trump, which is that you had a bunch of voters who were infrequently participating, but were drawn out by the candidacy of President Trump to vote in this particular election, in a presidential election. But in a midterm election where we all know the electorate changes, right? Maybe things go back. Like the polls in 2018 did really well relative historically. So people thought that, all right, we've solved it after 2016. Then 2020 comes around, it's like, not so much, right? And so again, is the difference between a midterm and presidential election, like the different in the electorate, how consequential is that? Versus how consequential is it to the types of arguments that were being made and the type of political dialogue that may have changed whether or not people were willing to kind of participate in polls, right? And so either one of those could have explained the uniqueness of what happened in 2020. And the reality is that we're not going to really know. We're not going to really know of 2022 either, right? Because if the polls do well in 2022, right, does that mean polls are good, right? Or does that just mean the difference between a midterm versus a presidential election where the errors that we're observing are because of particular types of voters and kind of non-respondents who only show up in presidential election years because those are kind of less, the different dynamics of the elections that are involved. And so unfortunately, there's more questions there than answers. And so like, I thought, what we did is kind of, what does the data allow us to say and what can we prove? And then try to restrict ourselves and just being honest about like, look, there's some things that we don't know and it's going to be hard to know just because the difficulties that like, like when you try to look at this, like we still don't know, for example, the fraction of Democrats and Republicans that voted, right, in the electorate. We try to figure out what fraction of new voters were there. And you don't know that either because people move. And if you talk to different voting file companies, they have different numbers about the fraction of new voters. And so the amount of information, which in some sense makes what the polls did remarkable, right? Because given the amount of stuff that we don't know about like the electorate, even 7 months after, right, the votes were certified, it just kind of the level of difficulty is really, really hard to diagnose this kind of information.
I had a fear during the last week of the election with concern over the mail delivery of absentee ballots. And my fear was that the polls could be both right and wrong at the same time, that maybe the people we were talking to were telling us they were voting and they were voting for Biden. And then the thing got, shredded along the way. I know there's no evidence of any of that. There's been some anecdotal reports.
Oh no, we're not going to go. Not going to go down the rigged fraud conspiracy theories. Okay, settle down. There's enough of those on both sides of the
You were going to
aisle
ask them something.
to keep us to keep us political scientists in business for a long time. So, but we noticed in our poll experiments after 2016. We noticed we took a look at cell frame sample, and I just wondered if the committee had an opportunity. I know you looked at different modes of polling, the online, the IVR, the traditional telephone, dual frame polling, but I didn't know if you got a chance to take a look at any of the sampling issues. Geography was a really, really big deal in the election, and we discussed it not only in the in the industry and in the poll in polling discussions, but in politics too. And one of the things that we saw in 2016 actually had to do with the sample itself. That is, that there's a slight bias towards population clusters in a region. So that is like phone numbers themselves are more likely to be from urban, suburban communities when we draw samples, or at least population centers in rural counties. And this increases actually for some of the sample products that many of us use to improve productivity. I know we try to adjust usually after data collection, but some of it seems that we can't balance what isn't there. So if we haven't talked to these people and they're underrepresented, we don't end up getting them back in our sample by trying to balance back to those geographies. Did the committee get a chance to take a look at any of those issues? I know it's more technical, but it's kind of the front end before we even start talking to voters.
No, I mean, that's a great point, right? And the other point is that, people do like registration-based samples, for example, right? To basically adjust costs, you try to figure out who's a likely voter, right? Or that I can minimize like the cost of kind of polling. And that could also, like if there's new voters who are infrequent voters, that could also, create particular issues. And yeah, and so, I mean, because you have to like merge back a phone number that you find from someplace, and then, you're not likely to catch mobile people. And so there's lots of different issues involved that are all excellent. Unfortunately, the task force itself is pretty limited in our access to the data there. So, we're just going out there collecting all the publicly released polls and then working with, organizations that kind of shared us some of their data, but the data we got was in no means comprehensive, just because like it's a pro bono committee done by like 18 individuals. And in the meantime, it's like we're doing our regular lives and hopefully paying attention to our kids and stuff like that. And so like the amount of work it would take to do that is ginormous, right? To do a technical term, but that doesn't mean it's not true. It just, that was very difficult from our perspective to do this kind of analysis, because all we were basically relying on is what people told us that they were doing. And as you know, a lot of the presentation of like, well, what are you waiting on? It's unknown. Like some people don't even report their margin of error or their sampling frame. And like, so other people were asking, well, shouldn't you evaluate how people ask the questions differently? And well, maybe that would be true, but like, we didn't have access to that particular information. Like the task of trying to quantify all the 2,000 polls that were being done right, to give a snapshot and understand exactly what the decisions were being made, right? It would be amazing if that resource existed, but the practical reality of the situation, that's very hard for an ad hoc task force to kind of get into that level of granularity and the technical. That doesn't mean it's not super important, but just we didn't have the bandwidth to kind of do those particular questions, even though, as you point, right, it's possible that coverage issues and geography, given how partisan things are now, is a really important question and could have really important implications going forward.
Yeah, one of the things I learned, Josh, about what you do also, obviously at Vanderbilt and with the task force, but also you have an important role election night with NBC, which is sort of makes us distant cousins because of our battleground state polling for them. Could you just, before we let you go, just tell a little bit about that work and how consequential that can be?
Yeah, so I'm an election night senior election analyst. So what that means is that they sequester me in this dark room without access to the outside world for this time for like a week. It was like horrible, right? But right, and so so what you do is you find, as the information comes in, you basically crank the data. We write statistical models to kind of compare how the votes are comparing to last time, what the different types of votes are, how many votes are outstanding, and like when we reach the 99.95% level of certitude, right, then we tell the people on television that we're confident we can project this particular state for a particular race. And so it's kind of using not so much polling, although it is a little bit of exit polling, but most of it's kind of just analyzing the vote that comes in and trying to discern the patterns in the vote across different states and across different counties, trying to make projections, on election night.
And that was no picnic, given the way the votes were coming in and being counted, because as we know, it took days till we got to that point.
No, it's horrifying, and you realize that also, like, just the way that we do elections, where everything is at the state level, right? Like federalism, right? Concerned about strong national government, and the founding mean that we decentralized all the election administration. But that means every state, if not every county, has different ways of doing it. And right, so for example, Michigan, there's not a central place for a Secretary of State where you can get all the state results, right? You go to the webpage and it says, go to each of our counties, get the data. And so you get different data from different counties. And so it's really, you get a real picture of the diversity of America in terms of how they administer elections and how they report elections, which makes it particularly challenging, but also I think really super important, right? To kind of figure out and to get a sense, like, what the election is telling us, even though it may be a longer story than people are using to, right? It's kind of an external validation about how the votes are being counted, who's counting the votes, and kind of what the outcome is, so that people can understand and get some transparency about, how elections are held in the United States.
Well, Josh, thanks for sharing the thankless task that you took on of putting together the report on the 2020 election. It strikes me that we start where we end, or we end where we started, which was that the headlines didn't necessarily capture the nuance of what you found, just like the headlines at the beginning during the election didn't necessarily capture the fact that when you look at the averages, the polls weren't really all that far off. It's just that most people expected Biden to win by 10 points, and it didn't happen. So lots of expectations out in the media versus what became the reality. And I think people should appreciate the honesty that you didn't come back, or the group didn't come back and say, here's the magic bullet, here's the answer. But that ambiguity of, we don't know, but here's some of what to look at. I think that honesty should be much appreciated. And maybe the headlines, as Barbara pointed out, missed that. But Josh Clinton, professor of political science at Vanderbilt University, and more importantly for this discussion, the chair of the APOR panel that looked at the 2020 election. Thanks so much for sharing some of your pain with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
Well, as Jay promised in the open, switching gears a little bit and going even further back in time, 1979, we get our fun fact today, a poll that was done by the Virginia Slims American Women's Poll, 1979. And they asked, what disadvantages, if any, the next generation of women will have that are greater than those of women today? Well, this was kind of like a real throwback in time, and I'll welcome your reactions to it. First of all, 27% of women said there were no disadvantages. Okay, so everything's going to be fine. However, there were a whole bunch of people who talked about the workplace, and I thought some of the responses were pretty well. You guys react. 13% said homes and children will suffer because women are out working, less family life. A woman's place is in the home.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's certainly an opinion that's still
Oh,
exists.
that's a Barb
That's certainly
struggling
an
to be
opinion.
polite. All right, let me throw this one at you.
Well, no, you know what I'm actually thinking of? I'm thinking of a similar question that we found from the 1940s that asked whether women should even be allowed to work. Okay, and the overwhelming opinion that women should stay in the home, to raise children. That was the best thing, for women to do. That was their skill set. So, if we're taking a look now, 30 years even later, from the 1940s to the 1970s, the fact that only 13% of women felt that way. I mean, I think talks about the tremendous change.
But we got more.
Okay.
All right, we got 9% said they will lose respect they now have from men. They won't be treated as ladies, won't be given special courtesies like men opening the doors.
I still open the doors for women.
Yes, I do too. I'll open the door for anybody. I'm happy to. Anyway, 9% said they will have more responsibilities, more problems to cope with, have to be more self-sufficient, more will be expected of them. And 4%, women will miss out on being home to raise a family, miss out on the real meaning of marriage and family. Boy, this is I'm thinking of the Equal Rights Amendment. I'm thinking of the gender gap that emerged in politics all after all this. So, wow, heady stuff.
Would the women who answered that survey be really surprised by the opinions and attitudes of the women today?
If you could go forward in time and back in time, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, there's one that stood out for another reason to me on this, because it is very true, although I'm not sure that anybody in 1979 really was thinking about it because it's a macroeconomic thing. But 4%, it's the top in our list in terms of they just ordered it. It's not ordered in the way people answered. More women will have to work, or they'll have no choices to working. Women will have to work to help support the family. And that's one of the biggest macroeconomic changes since the 70s is women having to work for family incomes to be at the same level as they were in families in the 70s when there was a single breadwinner. So, I mean, it's interesting. You pull out little nuggets like that actually did come true for different reasons than we were, maybe thinking about. But I thought that one was really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's clearly. And then this is all about the social and the cultural stuff. And that really had to do with the economics. And that's really what really drove women into the workplace more. But anyway, that's it for Fun Fact this week.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. I'm Mary Griffith and Poll Hub's executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor. Ashley Marcinek is our production assistant, and Marcello Bettman is our trusted editor. Thanks to the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University. They provide us with the ability to look back at survey questions and results over the decades. If you have questions or comments, reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter and Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. And while you're at it, check out our free series of short online learning modules. The Marist Poll Academy can be found on maristpoll.com. Finally, if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review on your podcasting app of choice. Positive reviews help others find us. And while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you back here next week.